Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Today I am covering one that has been so highly requested for quite a long time now. It's took me a while to get around to it because the list is very long, but we are covering the murderer of the Appalachian Trail, Randall Lee Smith. Randall Lee Smith, his case is so infuriating. I cannot even tell you. This man would murder, go to prison, be released early, and then try to murder again in the very same location on the Appalachian Trail. This man is a complete evil monster, and I think we're going to have a lot to say about him. Let me know down in the comments below exactly what you think of this man, because he is a complete POS. Before we jump into the video, if you're new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified yapper, and one day I decided to come on the internet, yap about true crime in the hopes of finding a community of people who are interested in the same things that I am, and I think I found you. I think I got very lucky actually. And this reminds me, we just hit 14k. 14k, and I know, listen, I know a lot of people out there, that'll be a very small number, but to me this is huge, and I am just so bloody grateful. I cannot even put it into words. Like, I've never had so much fun doing what I'm doing and chatting with yous in the comments and my DMs, my emails, wherever. It's just the best thing ever, and I truly love and adore every single one of you. So please, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do, because it means everything to me. And you know, if you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe with the notification bell on, because I upload twice a week, every single week on a Wednesday and Sunday. This week it's been a bit different because I am moving house, but I am still getting out my 2 videos for you. It's just not been on the allocated days. Don't forget to leave a comment down below, because that really helps me with the YouTube algorithm. It helps them know that people actually enjoy my content and they push it out to other people on YouTube. So if you can do that, that would mean a lot. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the case of Randall Lee Smith, the Appalachian Trail murderer. So again, we have a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is ignore the hair. Please, for the foreseeable, ignore the hair, because whilst I'm moving house, it's as good as you're going to get. And I'm sorry, because it is terrible. It literally looks like a rat or a skunk or something crawled up to the top of my head and just died, and I've kept it there and tried to pass it off as hair. It's not a skunk or a rat, but if you were thinking that, I totally get it. Now, Randall Lee Smith, can we all agree that this guy looks like death warmed up? He looks dead and alive at the same time. It's so weird. Randall Lee Smith, he was known as Lying Randall. Great start, people. Great start. The guy shows promise. Known as Lying Randall because of his constant need to tell lies and exacerbate his stories. So little Lying Randall, he was born on June the 29th of 1953 in Petersburg, Virginia. And his mother, Loretta Smith, and his father, who remains unnamed, I don't know who daddy is, I'm not sure. No one claimed him. But they had a very tumultuous, turbulent relationship. Very toxic, you know, very box standard for these serial killers. And honestly, for the most part, it kind of seemed like they hated each other. And his dad made it very clear that, you know, he just didn't want a relationship with his son. Now, with that being said, Randall's mother and father, they would divorce when he was only 6 months old, and Randall was left to live with his mum, Loretta, and he would continue living with Loretta, excluding the 15 years that he had a little prison stint. But after that, he continued living with Loretta up until her death in 2000. And the Smiths, they would go on to live in multiple different small homes in the unincorporated community of Petersburg, Virginia. The Smiths, they then settled in a 4-room single-story house, and this would actually be the permanent residence of Randall Smith right up until his own death. Now, for the first few years of Randall Smith's life, Loretta, his mother, she would dress him up in girl clothes. We have no idea why, like Loretta never said why she did this. And obviously this must have been so confusing for Randall, like why were all the other little boys dressed so differently to him, and he's dressed like the little girls. And no matter how much he questioned his mum or begged his mum to let him wear the things he wanted to. Now, there was speculation that Loretta, she had in fact wanted a little girl, and because Randall wasn't a little girl, this was like punishment toward Randall, almost forcing him to be the child that she really wanted. Which again, would have been absolutely horrible for Randall. Like, why can he not just be accepted by his mother? So as you can probably imagine, as a young child, Randall very much kept to himself. He was very reclusive. He didn't really want to socialise with anyone. And if I'm absolutely honest, I don't really think anyone wanted to socialise with him. Like, no one was knocking his door down asking him to come out and play. But Randall had his own little hobbies that he would participate in to keep himself amused. And one of these hobbies was being out in the wilderness. It's given Jerry Schaefer. He also liked to collect arrowheads. It's given Jerry Schaefer. And I'm worried. So for school, Randall would attend the local Giles High School, and you can probably imagine how he was in high school as well. He was still an outcast, he was very much still a loner, he never participated in any sports or any activities in or out of the school. So Randall, he ended up leaving school in the 11th grade and he went on to get a job as a shipyard welder. Now this job would have him travelling between Ingram and also Newport, doing his shipyard work, his shipyard welding. Now remember how I said in the community he was known as Lying Randall. Why, I hear you ask? Let me tell you, he is just a big old liar pants on fire. Like, I'm surprised his nose does not extend to the other side of the world with the amount of lies this man tells. Like, he would tell acquaintances the most wild and unbelievable stories. Like, the most simplest story would be so heavily embellished it sounded insane. And the most embarrassing part of it all is everyone knew he was lying, and yet he just kept spouting this crap about all this stuff, like his marriage. He'd make up lies about marriage, his family, himself, his early life, his future. You'll hear more as it goes on, but it's just wild. Everything that came out of his mouth was fabricated. Now, it was reported that Randall would be married twice before his convictions. Could I find evidence of this? No, and I searched long and hard, but I see you smirking at that. Clear that dirty mind. But I did. I searched and I searched and I searched, and I could not find for love nor money whether or not he was married twice, but apparently he was, which really surprises me because how he would get a wife, I don't know. Now, I will be honest, there's not much documented regarding his early crimes, but we do know that he was partial to an encounter with the law. He was a very aggressive man. He was described as being very violent. If anyone annoyed him, he would see red, like just go into this blind rage. And I mean, for someone who's supposedly got all these convictions, I really couldn't find dash much. Now, not even just to the law, but also to family and acquaintances. He was just known to be a very angry, violent and deceitful man. Sounds like a stand-up guy. And Randall Lee Smith, as we know, he was a man of the great outdoors. He loved to be outside. He loved to be in like forests and woodland. And honestly, I would love to tell you that this was because of his undying love for nature, or, the fact that he would go out and meditate to the woodland sounds, the birds chirping, the trees, leaves rustling. Or I'd even love to tell you that he liked to bird watch, but unfortunately, this was not the case. Randall Lee Smith, he knew that being outside in the forest, in the woodland, almost provided him a cover. He could hide in plain sight. He could do whatever he wanted in that woodland and possibly not get caught. But he would, because he's weird and he's dumb. But, possibly he wouldn't. And I have to say, Randall, he had, found himself his perfect spot, the spot that he enjoyed doing this most in, and that was throughout the Appalachian Trail. Now listen, is it Appalachian? Is it Appalachian? I think it's Appalachian, but it does not sound right in my accent. Appalachian probably sounds better in my accent, but I hear people say Appalachian, so if you know, let me know, so I can be in the know. So the Appalachian Trail, let me tell you, it's big, it's huge. That's what she said. But truly it is. It stretched, I think, like 2,000 miles. It started at Springer Mountain in Georgia and stretched all the way to Katahdin Mountain in Maine. Katahdin? How are we saying that? Now, what's amazing about the Appalachian Trail and why so many people are drawn to it is because of how far it extends. Like, you go through all different places. It has something like 6 national parks and like 8 national forests. So there's a lot to see, which is why people love to hike it so much. And whilst the Appalachian Trail is famous for being this really beautiful spot and this really unique experience for hikers, it would devastatingly become known for its infamous murders as well. So in May of 1981, 27-year-old Robert Mountford Jr. and also 27-year-old Laura Susan, also known as Susu Ramsey, they were both social workers at the time, and they had agreed to do this hike through the Appalachian Trail, and the goal was to raise money for a charity that supported children with developmental challenges. Now, both Laura and Robert, they were known as being some of the most compassionate people you would ever meet. Like, their whole goal in life was to better other people's lives, which is absolutely incredible. They were so dedicated to the social work that they participated in, and they were just beyond passionate about the work that they do. Both of these people were described as being the most kind-hearted and generous people you could ever meet, and just some of life's really good people. And I think that is why it was so devastating for their community as well as their family when their lives were taken. So on the evening of May the 19th of 1981, Robert and Laura, they were partway through some of their trail hike. They were going along, they start getting a bit hungry, and so they decide to stop off at Wapiti Shelter. Now, Wapiti Shelter, that is actually in the area of Giles, Virginia. Now, Laura and Robert, they had met another hiker along the way who they hit it off with. Like, the guy was a bit strange, but he was harmless, he was nice, he was friendly, and they had invited him to come to dinner with them that evening because this man was by himself. And this hiker, of course, was Randall Lee Smith. So as Laura and Robert are sitting down to share a meal with Randall, it became evident real quick that Randall was trying to flirt with Laura. Now Laura's like, that's not what I want. But Randall was flirting with Laura because she was being nice to him, and he believed that this meant Laura liked him, when in reality Laura was just a nice, decent, normal person, and he completely took this the wrong way. Now Robert, he could tell right away that Laura was feeling very uncomfortable with the interaction she was having with Randall, so he really tries to change the subject, get Randall away from the flirting, hang up the flirting shoes, and let's just be friends. Now, when Randall was kind of getting the message that Laura didn't like him, this completely enraged him. Because how dare a female turn down a man, and vice versa? But how dare you shun someone who likes you? As soon as that meal finished, Laura and Robert, they were just desperate to get away from Randall and get back to their own campsite. So they were saying goodbye to Randall and they had planned to head back, but little did they know, Randall had a completely different plan all of his own. And then really abruptly, Randall, he just pulls out a .22 caliber gun and he shoots Robert in the head. Now after shooting Robert, he grabs a large piece of iron and he strikes Laura with this before repeatedly stabbing her with a knife and an object that was described as a long nail. Laura, she had so many defensive wounds all over her hands, she had really fought for her life. And there was also evidence that Laura had been sexually assaulted, which is just awful to think this man that they've befriended along the way, who they've invited to dinner because he was on his own, and he's done that to them. It's just so evil. The way that he has targeted his victims, it's just unbelievable. So as soon as Randall has finished murdering both Robert and Laura, he then proceeds to drag their bodies away from the cabin. He then took the sleeping bags of Laura and Robert and he would bury them in their own sleeping bags in a very shallow grave near Dismal Creek. So at this point, Randall is now thinking to himself, how do I conceal these murders that I just committed on innocent, nice people because I'm evil? And he decides what he is going to do is go back down the Appalachian Trail and go to the shelters that were there on their way. Now, in these shelters, there was logbooks that would have to be signed by the hikers, basically as checkpoints, so if something happened, if they went missing, people would know their last location. Now Randall, he went to take these books so people wouldn't be able to track the last known location of Robert and Laura. So less than 2 weeks later, right, the police, they're made aware that there is missing people, Robert and Laura. People haven't seen them, they've disappeared from the trail, they can't track them down. And immediately police get involved, and this is a missing persons investigation. So obviously they know that they were on the Appalachian Trail, so they start going along the trail and they speak to people along the way, like different hikers, anyone who might work on the trail. And that is when they come across someone who states that they had last seen Robert and Laura speaking to someone by the name of Randall Lee Smith. And this Randall Lee Smith, he was also going around telling all the other hikers what had happened to Robert and Laura. Keeping himself out of it, of course, but telling them nonetheless that he knew what had happened. Now, cadaver dogs were brought in to help search the area, and ultimately they would find Robert and Laura's remains in their sleeping bags in a shallow grave near Dismal Creek. Police, they had also been signalled toward Wapiti Shelter, and when they went there, they discovered on the floorboards and in between the floorboards, there was still some blood there. Blood that had been either Laura's or Robert's. They also found a camera that had the film removed from it, and there was also a book that belonged to Laura that she had planned to read whilst they were hiking this trail. Of course, a forensic examination was performed on the evidence that was found at the scene of the crime, and from this they were able to extract a clear, bloody fingerprint. Now, when they ran this, who did it lead them to? Randall Lee Smith. Now, a subsequent search of Randall Lee Smith's home would reveal further items linking him to the crimes. Now, in particular, they had found a bloodied pair of jeans that was stated to belong to either Robert or Laura. Whilst it's great that they found further evidence that links Randall to the murders of these two people, Randall himself was nowhere to be seen. And apparently, there was a note left behind from a kidnapper stating that they had kidnapped Randall and were going to kill him. But this was Randall, obviously. Honestly, it's hilarious, right? Because police, they were able to track down Randall at Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. Now, as soon as they come across Randall, they say to him, you know, identify yourself. And he's like, I can't identify myself. I have amnesia and I don't even know how I got here or why I'm here. And honestly, at this point, I'm like, this guy is setting the scene for the whole, like, I murdered them whilst I had amnesia. I don't know what happened. So Randall, he gets extradited back to Virginia, right? And obviously still not identifying himself. And the police, they're able to basically trick him into identifying himself. So they see on Randall that he has like these bug bites, and they say to him, you know, those bug bites, they're really serious. You're going to need medical attention. But before we can give you medical attention, we just need you to sign this form. Now, the bug bites, they were like midgie bites, right? Like, no big deal, no harm, no foul. But Randall, he's like, oh, I don't want to die. You know, I just kill people. I don't want to die. And Randall, he signs this document for the medical treatment, and he signs it Randall Lee Smith. Well, that amnesia ended quick. So of course he's been a complete idiot and he has identified himself, and now when the police ask about the murders, he simply says, I don't want to talk about it. That's a shame, but someone needs to, and you are the killer, so, you know, forthcome with the information, please. Whilst he was being held in custody, it was said that Randall Smith, he was exhibiting dissociative behaviour, you know, and then he was claiming that he does not remember anything about himself or about his past. With this, psychological tests would be run, and he was diagnosed with nothing. Because there was nothing wrong with this guy. There was nothing to diagnose him with. It was all a show. It was all a lie. Lying Randall. So Randall, he would be charged with 2 counts of murder. But despite the prosecution having, you know, a great deal of evidence, they were worried because they never had a motive for the killings. they couldn't guarantee that they would get a conviction. Now, they wanted to make sure that this guy wound up behind bars, and so they offered a plea agreement. I will say that this plea agreement was first discussed with the families of Robert and Laura, and they had agreed to go forward with this plea agreement to ensure that there would be a conviction. The day before his trial, he would actually accept this plea bargain, and by accepting this, it meant that he would be convicted of second-degree murder, and he would only have to serve 30 years in prison. But it could be less with good behaviour. The public was completely outraged, and even the police. The police thought this guy should get at least life in prison. They were shocked when they heard the conviction. There was a particular outrage in the hiking community because, of course, many hikers go down that trail, and who's to say that one of those wouldn't be next? There was a spokesman for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and he had said that Smith was the first person to murder a hiker who might actually see the light of day again. And this statement from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, it really hit home for a lot of people, and they were like, you know what? That is actually so true. This man has taken the life of two innocent people, two people who were hiking for charity, and yet he might get the opportunity to leave prison one day. How is that justice? Now, whilst Randall's in prison, it might shock you to learn he didn't really have any visitors. His mum would visit him on 1 or 2 occasions, and that was it. No one else cared about going to see him, and his own mum didn't really care about going to see him. She just went to show face like one time. Now, would you believe it? But Lion Randall, he didn't make any connections or friendships or relationships in prison. He was just a complete loner who, again, kept himself. And the next part I just know is going to make your blood boil because it infuriated me. In 1996, just 15 years into his sentence, okay, halfway through his sentence, he would be released on mandatory parole for good behaviour. And the families of Robert and Laura were absolutely distraught, as was the public. Everyone was completely against this and rallied against this decision. But ultimately he would be freed. Now, Randall, he was ordered to return to Ingram, and he had to live with his mother, and he had been fitted with an electronic anklet. #fashion. And this was part of his 10-year supervision order. So as I mentioned earlier, in the year 2000, is that a Busted song? No, 3000. In the been to the year 3000, not much has changed, but they live underwater. I'm sorry, but in 2000, right? No, the Busted 3000. In 2000, Randall's mother would pass away, and this left Randall completely on his own. Now, even some of his neighbours, when they realised that he would be completely by himself, and when they seen how reclusive he was, they felt bad for him, and they actually started making an effort with him. It wouldn't be me, but like, you know, congrats on being a nice person, I suppose. Now, it might shock you again that these attempts to connect with Randall were unsuccessful. He had no desire to connect with anyone. He was quite happy just being, you know, little loner son. Randall, he is having to look after himself now, so he gets some odd jobs around the town, and this is when he would kind of come out of his shell. And whenever he was ready to, you know, chit-chat with people, he was still making up these elaborate tales about himself, about his life, about his family, about marriages. He was just going off on one, and yet again, people did not believe a word this guy said, and it just made him look even creepier. But he just kept going with it. Listen, I don't know who let this happen, right? But during this time, Randall Lee Smith, he was still loitering around the Appalachian Trail, right? I don't know how it happened, but he was there. And to the outside world, he was becoming even more reclusive than he had been before. But on the Appalachian Trail, he was very, very chatty. He had a lot to say to the hikers. So in 2008, Randall, you know, he thinks money's a bit tight around here. I'm getting a wee bit broke. And whilst I could go and get a full-time job, I just don't want to. So Randall decides that he's going to pick up some of his belongings, his dog, and his fishing gear, and just go live off the land, right? That was his plan. Around 6 weeks later, neighbours, they notice that they haven't seen Randall Lee Smith for quite a while. They go to his door, there's no answer, they haven't seen him, they've peeked in the windows, no one's around, and they're concerned as to where he was. So they contacted the police and just made them aware that their neighbour, the Randall Lee Smith, is nowhere to be seen and hasn't been seen in around 6 weeks. Police are immediately concerned because they're thinking, what is he planning to do? Where has he went? And so they put out a missing persons report and they're telling people to keep an eye out for Randall Lee Smith and pick up the phone if you see him. And now this takes us to May the 6th of 2008 when Randall would come across 38-year-old Scott Johnston and 33-year-old Sean Farmer. So Scott and Sean, they were long-time buddies. Like, they had known each other almost their whole lives from their younger years. They were both residents of Bluefield, Virginia. They both loved to go camping and fishing together, and it was something that they did quite often. Even when work was hectic, even when there was not enough time in their day, they still found time to pencil in that fishing trip with each other. Now, because they had been friends for so long, their bond was so strong. They were like inseparable at times, and the community of Bluefield always noted that Sean and Scott were together. Both Sean and Scott, they were described as being some of the most kind, compassionate, gentle, generous people you would ever meet, and both of them were said that if they had seen someone in need, they would not hesitate to help that person. Like, they would jump right in, help them as best as they can. Now, because they would always make time for fishing trips, and some fishing trips might have been very last minute and they would just kind of go off and do their own thing, when Sean and Scott hadn't been seen for a couple of days, this wasn't really worrying to the community or family because this is what they did. They went away sometimes off the cuff and just, came back when they were finished. And no one could really suspect that anything would be wrong because they would often travel to Dismal Creek to do their fishing. Now, I will also say Dismal Creek had not really been busy since the murders of Robert and Laura because people just didn't feel safe going down there, and rightly so. But Sean and Scott, they did go there quite often and it felt like a safe space to them, so they continued doing what they've always done. And the reason that they liked it is because it was quiet, it was secluded, it was very unlikely that you would run into anyone there. But unfortunately they would. So on May the 6th of 2008, Sean and Scott, they set off to Dismal Creek separately, so they'll get there at different times. Now Sean, he was the first one to arrive at the campsite, and Scott on the other hand, he had went to start on fishing at Brushy Mountain. Whilst he is fishing at Brushy Mountain, he is approached by this man. This man and his dog. He seems quite friendly, seems nice enough, he's polite, he's well spoken, and he introduces himself as Ricky Williams. Ricky Williams, my ass. Now listen, I don't know how fishing goes, right? I don't know if people fish with guns often, but Ricky Williams, he was packing a 22 caliber pistol, and I don't know why. Well, I do because I've researched the case, but to you guys, I don't know. So to Scott, Ricky had seemed very, very friendly, and because of that, Scott decided to, ask Ricky if he wanted to do some fishing with him, to which Ricky had agreed. And the pair of them seemed to get along so well that Scott ended up asking Ricky if Ricky would like to come back to his and his friend's campsite for dinner that evening. He even handed Ricky some of the fish that they had caught and sort of pointed him in the direction of the campsite whilst he got all the rods and fishing gear together. So this Ricky Williams guy, he makes his way back to the campsite and he approaches Sean and he's like, hey, I'm Ricky Williams from Newport, and I was just fishing with Scott and he invited me back for some dinner. Here's the fish. Getting ready to set up the meal. Now, Sean did find this a bit strange at first because, it's a stranger, and he's just rocked up holding fish. Who's to say? But Scott did follow shortly behind and he was like, you know what, that's fine. A friend of Scott's is a friend of mine, so welcome Ricky, come and join us. Scott and Sean, they're like, God, this Ricky guy is heaven sent. He's really pulling his weight around this campsite. Ricky was very helpful and he had put himself in charge of collecting dry firewood for them. And because he was so helpful around the camp, Sean and Scott, they were quite happy to have him around. So at this point, this Ricky guy, he has successfully inserted himself into this friendship. He has successfully befriended the both of them. So they've had dinner, they're sitting around the campsite and they're just, exchanging stories. Now, Scott and Sean, they've grew up together, they know everything that there is to know. So they tell Ricky some stories of theirs and then they ask Ricky about his life. Now, Ricky, he said that he graduated from Virginia Tech and that he had even written papers for NASA. High flyer is Ricky Williams. Now, the only thing about Ricky is he was very animated in his storytelling, which made his stories seem very fake, because they were. But Scott and Sean had picked up on this fakery and they were kind of laughing it off, like, like, you're funny, we obviously know you're not being serious. And yet again, because Ricky's stories weren't being believed, Ricky was very unhappy. And at this point, Sean and Scott, they could tell something was off. Like, Ricky seems a bit angry. Like, what's wrong with Ricky? Like, his smile's upside down. So Scott and Sean, they're still trying to enjoy their night, but it would seem that their new friend, Ricky Williams, he's kind of went into his shell. He's a bit more reclusive now. Why is that? And then when darkness would fall upon the trail at night, Ricky Williams, this lovable stranger, he abruptly stood up. He walked around behind Sean and shot him in the head. He then quickly turned around to Scott before Scott could do anything, and he shot Scott in the neck. I cannot believe this bit either, right? But whilst this Ricky character is shooting Sean in the chest at point blank range, Scott is able to flee the campsite, but not before taking a bullet to the head. He is still alive and he manages to escape. I don't know how. And miraculously, while Scott has already been able to flee, Sean is also able to flee the camp and he jumps into his truck whilst this Ricky Williams is reloading his gun. These men have been shot in the head and the chest and they are still alive. It is genuinely a miracle. Now, as Sean was driving the truck down the trail, he actually sees Scott and he picks Scott up and they both get in the truck with great difficulty. They're able to drive themselves to a home nearby and they request the owner to call 911. So the police, they get to the area really quick alongside the ambulance, and Scott and Sean, they're transported to Carillion Roanoke Memorial Hospital. And incredibly, both of these men would survive these what should have been fatal injuries. They survive. Now, one of the homeowners from the home that had called 911, when the men had described to them the person who did this, they thought to themselves, my God, that looks like this guy that we've seen in a missing persons poster. So this man, he sends his grandson to go to the grocery store and pick up one of these missing person flyers so they could show the police and the men the photo of the guy that they thought it was. Once Scott and Sean were stable enough that they could be interviewed, police did go into the hospital to talk to them about who had done this to them. They show Scott and Sean this missing persons poster that has a photo on it of a man who would look very familiar to both of them. And this is when they realise that the person who had shot them was not Ricky Williams. It had in fact been Randall Lee Smith. But in the meantime, whilst all of this is going on, Randall Lee Smith, he's taken Scott's truck and he's trying to flee back to his own campsite. Now, whilst he's doing this, he is spotted by a state trooper who immediately tries to intervene. So Randall, he is driving crazy, the state trooper is right on his tail catching up with him, when suddenly Randall flies off the road and his car wounds up upside down, him just hanging from the seat. Now, Randall, he would be transported to the same hospital as Sean and Scott, and he would remain under police surveillance for the next 2 days. Now, whilst he was in hospital, he would be arrested and charged with 2 counts of attempted murder. After this, Randall Lee Smith, he was then transferred to New River Regional Medical Unit. And here, he would claim that he shot both Scott and Sean in self-defence. Self-defence of what? Being good people? But of course, this claim coming from Pinocchio himself, the police knew that he was a liar. Now, coincidentally, the jail assistant superintendent, they had once been a member of the investigation team that had discovered the bodies of Laura and Robert. And they had also been the first officer to respond to Randall Smith's initial arrest in Myrtle Beach. And what's crazy is when he was in Myrtle Beach, he was actually there to take a break from the case of Robert and Laura because it was becoming too much. And then Randall Smith winds up being in the same place as him and he's the first officer to respond. It was meant to be. On the evening of May the 10th, just 4 days after this double shooting, Randall Lee Smith was found unconscious in his jail cell. Now, there was attempts made to revive him. I hope they didn't try too hard, but they did attempt to revive him, but ultimately he would pass away. Now, it was thought that he had passed away from an internal blood clot that he had got in the car wreck, but ultimately his autopsy would be marked as natural causes, and he would be 54 at the time of his death. So Randall Lee Smith was dead and hopefully went to hell. Well, I'm assuming he would have went to hell because he was an absolute monster, but I'm glad to see the back of him. Now, Scott and Sean, obviously, they endured a lot, not just the mental trauma of what happened, but also the procedures and the operations that they had to go through throughout their recovery. And not only was it a difficult time for them, but it was also a very costly time. Like, this was a lot of money they had to spend in order to recover. Now, some of the injuries, they were too severe to be completely healed, and the doctors, they would have to leave a bullet lodged in the skull of Sean because they were worried if they removed it, they could potentially, harm his brain or cause more damage to his skull. And Scott, he would also have a bullet that would have to remain in his back. And the pair of them, they still remain best friends to this very, very day. And they still continue to go on their fishing trips together. Despite what happened, they're not allowing this awful, horrible ordeal that they suffered to stop them from living their life, which I honestly think is incredible. But that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I really, really hope you enjoyed this one. Well, enjoyed's always the wrong word, but I just mean I hope you found it interesting, okay? Like, I don't think you enjoy death, but interesting, maybe. If you did enjoy, please make sure you are subscribed with the notification bell on because I upload every single week, twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. It's been a bit different this week because I am moving house, so we're trying to renovate and get stuff done, and it's just been a bit mental, but you've still got your 2 videos per week. If you're interested in anything I've used on my face today, they will all be linked down below in the description for you if there is anything you would like to pick up or purchase or just have a little look at, a little nosy. The links are not affiliate links, I don't make money off them, I just thought it was easier to link everything that I've used so you can purchase it if you really want to. If you want some more content for myself, you can give my social media handles a follow. That's my Instagram and TikTok. They're both linked down below in the description for you, alongside the link to my Google Doc, which if you want to recommend cases, I suggest you use that. You can email me, but I can't guarantee that it'll come through because I'm having a lot of trouble with my emails, but if you do want to get in touch, maybe DM me on Instagram or leave it in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this one and I hope you're having a lovely day so far, and please, please, please remember to be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!